Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Health Made Simple Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bart, and I have another great conversation about how to level up your health today. And this one's going to be, we're going to talk about vitamin D. We'll talk about the symptoms. What are the symptoms of deficiency? What are the sources? Like, where do we get vitamin D? Can we get it from our food? Is that even a possibility? What are some of the things? How do we test for it? What are the key things that we're looking for in the event that we do test for it? And then also, what are some of the purposes of vitamin D? And I think some of this gets lost in the conversations over all these years, especially the last couple of years. We hear so much about vitamin D, and even with all of that, clinically, I still find that at least 50% of the people that I'm taking care of, the ones that I'm testing, and by the way, every time I run a test, we always run vitamin D levels. That's how important it is. We'll get into that in just a moment here. I would say 50% in my clinic are deficient. That's even with health-oriented people. And I would say across the country, at least 70% of the people are suboptimal. When I talk about optimal, and we'll talk about this in just a moment when we talk about the testing, there's a difference between what they think is normal or okay levels. And again, we don't want to be normal, especially when it comes to our lab testing. If you just fall into the normal categories, does not mean optimal function. It means that if you have a test 100 people, whether they're sick or healthy is irrelevant. It really just means that that's 100 normal people. So you could be put into the category of 100 people, of which X amount could be sick, and you could be measured against those. So we're not going to use normal. We're going to use optimal levels, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So this is what we'll cover. We'll cover the symptoms. If you're deficient in it, we'll talk about the purpose of vitamin D, and this, I think, where the fun is. And then we'll also talk about the sources that you can or cannot get vitamin D from, and this is a very interesting conversation right there. And then also, how do we test? And then if we are deficient, what do we do about it? All right, so keep doing the thing, keep sharing it out, keep spreading the love. This is a very simple, winnable opportunity for us to level up our health when it comes to our health. All right, let's talk vitamin D here. Let's talk about the purpose of vitamin D first. I think this is a fun conversation here. Let's start with some of the fundamentals. Vitamin D receptors are on every single cell in the human body. This by itself says a lot, meaning that it is important for us to have it. And the good news is that our body can make it. That's how special it is. With that being said, it regulates over 1,000 different gene expressions. I'll go farther here. In order for your cells and organs to function, vitamin D is going to play a role. So it participates in every function, well, in the way that every cell and organ in your body is going to function. So right away, we know if we have a deficiency in vitamin D, you're going to have a downregulated human body. So let's make sure that we're going to stay in optimal ranges here. We'll talk about those in just a moment here. It's produced in your skin via sunlight or via sun exposure, and it's required to absorb calcium. And we have a lot of people out there talking about, I need more calcium. More often than not, we find that we have low vitamin D levels and you have the inability to absorb calcium. Calcium is actually very easy for us to come by. Helps fight infections, boosts up the immune system. It is, if you name it, most likely when it comes to human function, vitamin D is playing a role. Well, let's talk about hormones just a moment. I won't do a deep dive here, but especially for anyone out there that has hormone dysregulation, especially low testosterone. So if we reverse engineer and we look at testosterone, we say, all right, testosterone is a hormone that the body uses. It's anabolic. It helps. It can help us build up muscle. It's really does that by increasing the blood production of cells. Yet when we go backwards and we look at that, testosterone comes from DHEA, and DHEA, one of its primary foundations is vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. So if you are low in vitamin D3, you're going to be essentially deficient in the building blocks for DHEA, which is the precursor to testosterone. So almost always when I see, and I'll see a lot of guys in this category, women as well, ladies, this is the exact same for you. If you have low vitamin D levels, D3 is what we're really talking about here. If you have low levels of vitamin D3, inevitably downstream, you're going to have low testosterone as well. So it's a simple, easy one to fix for hormone imbalance. And I know it gets overlooked here very, very often. And that's one of the big differences between functional medicine and traditional, just let's look at your labs and see what's low and try to make it high. So as a functional health practitioner, if we see low testosterone, one of the first things we're going to look at is, do you have optimal levels of vitamin D so you can even make that hormone? All right, so let's continue to just talk about a couple things when it comes to purpose. Again, I'm just going to back up and say that it is involved in over 1,000 different gene expressions, and it's on every single cell in the human body. So knowing that, we know that vitamin D is important. So the purpose is hands down a very important part of human function and of human performance. So now let's talk about some of the symptoms, and especially this time of year. I'm shooting this between the week of Christmas and New Year's. So I think today's the 27th, and it really gets exposed. Lower levels of vitamin D gets exposed this time of year, and in many different ways. We see things like what we call SAD, seasonal affective disorder. A lot of people have depression during this time of year, and we think it's because of a lot of other things than vitamin D. And more often than not, the sole root cause is vitamin D. And think about it for a second, that if vitamin D does play a role, is what we just talked about, and it does, in every single cell and function of all the organs in the body, including your ability to produce hormones. If it is that important in the way that we get vitamin D, and we'll talk about these deeper in just a second here, is predominantly through our own production. And that production requires exposure to the sun. So if you think about this for a second, when it comes fall time, we just look at some of the foundations of what takes place and why maybe vitamin D levels are going low. We put more clothes on and we're inside more, and the sun isn't as strong. Those three things right there say, wow, we're going to be decreasing our levels of vitamin D. So we start to see that things like seasonal affective disorders and, having immune systems that are breaking down in the fall season, what they call flu season, might not be all the germs, and it might not be depression. It actually might be just a simple deficiency in vitamin D here. So what other symptoms? Getting sick often, inflammation in the body. Vitamin D plays a huge role in helping the body stay uninflamed. Depression, fatigue, muscle cramps. We see that there's women that have had a breast cancer diagnosis. We always see that almost always see that there's low levels of vitamin D there. We saw an astronomical amount of people that tested positive for COVID and had bad effects, that they had a lot of the prolonged symptoms of COVID in the past. We saw there was a massive level of low and deficient vitamin D levels there. We see things. So I'll give you two examples. Anytime we see fibromyalgia, which really isn't a diagnosis, just a description, in things like chronic fatigue syndrome, those are almost always significant signs of vitamin D deficiencies. So a lot of these different things, whether musculoskeletal or hormonal or immune function, all of these, almost always vitamin D is playing a critical role. And that is why it is so important for each one of us that we take a moment, and we'll get to just a moment here. I know I keep saying that, but we're going to get here in just a moment of how do we test? Why is it so important that we are testing? Because that's going to help us determine the levels we're at, and where do we go with that? Because if we are deficient in there's going to be so many things that we could clear up when it comes to our health, and it's so easy to do so. So we're going to make sure that we know the proper levels today and how to go about figuring that out here. So we talked about the testosterone already. If you don't have vitamin D3 optimal levels, the likelihood of you eventually having proper levels of testosterone are very unlikely here. All right, so those are some of the symptoms. We talked about the purposes. It regulates over 1,000 different gene expressions, and it also participates in how every single cell and all the different organs in your body are going to function. So if we just left this podcast there, it would be enough motivation for you to go out and figure out, how do I figure out what levels I'm at? And if they're low, what do I need to do to bring them back up? All right, so let's talk about different sources. Like, where do we get vitamin D? So fortunately, once again, our creator was brilliant. And as a result of that, made us so we can be a healing machine. So our creator put a vitamin D receptor on every single cell in the human body, which is pretty cool. And in doing so, also made it so we can literally make vitamin D. And as much as I'm calling it vitamin D over and over again, technically it acts as a hormone, because it's going to create a cascade of events of actionable steps in the body. So it's really in the hormone category. So how do we really make it in the human body? It's through sun exposure. The sun is exposed to fatty acids, cholesterols in our skin, and your body converts that and makes what we call vitamin D. So fundamentally, that right there shows us that there could be a huge challenge here if we don't have sun exposure, or if our cholesterol is too low. And again, here's another situation where we kind of flip a lot of the conventional thought processes upside down. We say, well, we got to lower our cholesterol, lower our cholesterol. But if we lower our cholesterol too much, you're not going to be able to make vitamin D adequately. And therefore, we're going to see a lowering of most of the hormones in the human body. So with that being said, our creator is pretty smart. Put this big thing in the sky, thing we call the sun. It's unavoidable. It's there from the day that we were born to the day that we pass. And every day, all we have to do is go outside and get some exposure, and our body's going to be able to make this vitamin. It's almost like a fail safe. But unfortunately, here we come along in modern society, we completely cover most of our body, 95% of our body, in clothing. And then if we don't have clothing on them, we slap and lather all this other sunscreens that prevent and block out. Yes, even though you're in the sun, you have all those oils on it, you're not going to make your vitamin D. So don't confuse being outside with sunscreen as a result, as a good practice, meaning a practice of making good healthy hormones or good healthy vitamin D in your body. So once we lather up in all the sunscreens that we've been taught from age 5 going on, that we got to go outside, got to put on your sunscreen, those chemicals are interfering with our natural fats and fatty acids in the skin and block out the ability for us to make this important hormone called vitamin D. So we have all these practices involved in our everyday daily lifestyle that inhibit us from making this naturally producible thing called vitamin D, or this hormone called vitamin D. So we have this beautiful sun outside. We have all these good fatty acids that we should have in our body called cholesterol. So your body naturally makes cholesterol. So the system is built to win. That's part of what I want to, why this is really such an easy category to win at, is that everything's in place for us to win as long as we are not interfering. Can we get vitamin D from food? In the honest answer is yes, we can, but I would say probably only about 10% of what you're going to eat is going to really have an impact on your vitamin D levels. And probably the best sources are going to be your fatty fish, things like cod liver oil, sardines, mackerel. So if I just put those out there and say those are the best sources, and I think about who is really consuming those on a regular basis, not too many people do that. Myself, I like all of those. It's if you listen to our podcast before, you know that I'm recommending cod liver oil is probably my number one recommendation because of its impact and naturally occurring vitamin A and vitamin D, and also its effect on brain health. So I love cod liver oil. It's my favorite fish oil for everybody. It might not be the strongest version of DHA or EPA, but it's broader than most because of its ability to have vitamin D and vitamin A naturally occurring. But other than that, food-wise, yes, you can get some from mushrooms and from eggs, but it's not going to be a driving force in the situation of optimizing our vitamin D levels. Optimization is going to require us to have a good, healthy exposure to the sun on a regular basis. Most days of the year to be able to be exposed to the sun would be the key here. And then there's other things that are going to be interfering with our ability to make vitamin D. And this is what clinically we see very frequently. A liver that is blocked up and is dirty, that is clogged up with a lot of toxins. We're talking about alcohol. We're talking about medications. We do know that medications inhibit the ability for vitamin D to be made and especially utilized. Things like medications, steroids, antibiotic use, statins for cholesterols. Gut health is probably one of the most important roles here because everything is going to end up in the gut, and then essentially from the gut it gets sent out to the rest of the body. We're living indoors. We have clothing on our bodies. We have downregulated livers for the most part. And we think of then also just low cholesterols, which again, it kind of, again goes against traditional thought process here of always trying to lower our cholesterols to be healthier. Rather, we need good, healthy cholesterols for us to be good and strong. Now let's talk a little about the testing. This is where the rubber hits the road here. Very easy to test. Like I said when I started this off, I literally test, and every doctor should be out there testing. It should be part of every single test that we've done. It's not an expensive test, but because of its role, if we know that you are clinically suboptimal, we know that there's an easy fix to make you function better as a human being. Literally have better hormones, think better, move better. Your musculoskeletal system has less inflammation. Your body recovers better. Your brain will function better. So there's so many benefits to having optimal levels of vitamin D. Your immune system is going to function better. Cells, tissues, repair, mitochondria, all of those things are going to benefit from optimal levels. So why not test for it? It's just one of the easy low-hanging fruits there. In the event that your doctor hasn't run it or you haven't checked your levels in a while, there is a very simple at-home test. So now we have a standalone test for people who just say, I just want to check my vitamin D levels. And this is actually excellent too, especially if you're rechecking. You've tested, you've been low, and you don't maybe want to run the entire lab panel again. You can do this simple prick your finger at home test and send it in. If you'd like, we certainly have that available to you. We'll put it in our show notes today. I believe those tests probably run really not that expensive, probably $65, $75. You prick your finger. It's certainly that information that you'd get where you stand in optimally, and you can kind of write this down in your notes. So when you get those results back, about 45 is probably on the low end, 45 nanograms per milliliter. Up to about 70, 75. That would be the optimal state to be in. And it's real simple. If you get those results back and you're too low, I'm not a huge fan, clinic wise and protocol wise, to do super high dosing. If you're significantly low, often we'll go as high as 5,000 IUs of a vitamin D3 supplement, but I usually don't go much higher than that. Give it about 90 days of that type of protocol, anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000. Typically, I have people start around 2,000 to 3,000 IUs of vitamin D3, and we do that for a couple months. Around 90 days, and then we retest. Same thing. You prick your finger, send it in, and you get your results in about 10 days, and it'll let you know where you're going. And this is one of the simplest, easiest ways for you to be leveling up your health without a lot of cost and with a lot of, quite frankly, too much thinking to do about it. Now, I would also encourage that we get outside more. We get our eyes on the light in the first part of the day. We get up with the sun. We go to bed with the dark. We always eat in the light, and we get outside. We put our feet on the earth. We do a little grounding. We make sure we get exposure to the sun. That I would say most of us are deficient in sunlight. Not say most, I'd say all of us are. Just our lifestyles. We're sitting inside offices, sitting inside cars, sitting inside our our workplace. So there's so many ways that we don't even give thought to anymore, but we are really inhibiting our ability to be exposed to the most fundamental things that can produce health, things like sunlight and earth and air and whatnot that we have available to us every day. All right, so that's real simple, easy. Vitamin D, really important for us, very effective for us. An easy way to level it up. We talked a little bit about the purpose here. Over 1,000 different gene regulations here that affect different genes, the way the genes function here. It's on every single cell receptor in the human body. We want to have that. If you're going to test for it, somewhere between 45 and about 75 would be an optimal range. If you're a little bit high, no big deal. If you are lower, make sure you get it bumped up a little bit. We also know that some of the primary causes of deficiencies are a lack of sunlight is absolutely number one. Gut health is probably right there at number two, along with liver health. Medications like steroids and antibiotics, of course, create some interference. What else can we do about it? There are some good foods you can eat: cod liver oil, sardines, mackerel, some mushrooms, some eggs will have it as well. All right. Hopefully that's going to be an easy way for you to continue to level up your health. Keep doing your thing. Keep sharing it out. Keep leveling out. Of course, continue to take deliberate action for your mind, your body, your overall wellness. And we'll see you in the next podcast.